What's up, everyone? How you doing? It's Tuesday, and what a week it's been. So, how are you? What are you doing? What's going on? I see Kenneth was here early. What's up, Kenneth? Don't know if you're still around, but hello, Michael. How you doing? So, okay, I wanted to talk a little bit today about just I changed the name of this just a second ago to deadlines, progress, panic, and working through the fear, because I am I'm like in that position right now where I have my to-do list is way out of hand. You can see kind of like how that's just the one. This is my to-do list that hasn't been copied across yet. Plus, I've got this, plus some stuff that I talked about yesterday that I still have to do. And, I have at least two things that are like actively on fire need to be dealt with, and a whole bunch of others that are just due, like things that have to be done. And so I want to talk about this a little bit because I think part of it is just the nature of being an entrepreneur and not having a team is that, it's all your problem and sometimes it's going to pile up. And then other parts of it I think are on me for taking stuff that maybe wasn't the right fit or that I didn't have time for or things like that. And I don't know when it's the right time to make those claims, right? Because I'm a big fan of never trying to like put myself in a victim role. Like things don't happen to me, right? Like I'm here, the world is happening around me, but like very little of it is being done to slight me personally. It's all just sort of the random chaos of the world, and I'm in it or not, right? And so I've been thinking about what it means in these circumstances where I have taken actions that have led to me ending up where I am with my current workload and all of the stuff that I have to do for better or worse. And I'm so grateful that I'm in the position that I'm in where I have too much to do. So all of that becomes this sort of balancing act in my head of trying to understand, what's like, is this even bad? Or am I just busy and looking for reasons to be sad, right? Because I think that's a whole other thing is the sense of like, the grass is always greener, like, oh, it'd be cool if I didn't have anything to do. But like, I remember what it was like when I left Netlify before I started this business. I took time off, and my plan was to take 2 months off. That was the scheduled amount of time was like, don't work for 2 months. And I got 30 days in, and the absence of things to do, I kind of came unglued and had to find something to work on. I stayed longer than I wanted to because part of my fear response is to try to get productive. Like I guess part of my work ethic is that I've developed a coping mechanism of when things get hard, I try to work out. I like the only way out is through, if that makes any sense. And that I think has led to me having a pretty interesting relationship with my work where if I get uncomfortable, my instinct is to put more on, right? Because that's like the work is the thing that solves the problems. If I need to pay bills, I should get more work. If I want to do some big thing in the future, then getting more work is the thing that unlocks the revenue, the connections, the whatever it is that's going to allow me to do that big thing in the future. And if I'm feeling like I'm not accomplishing enough or like I'm not enough, then well, more work gives me something to have purpose, right? And I would say that this is one of those double-edged swords where, on the one hand, a lot of my success is attributable to the fact that this has become my coping mechanism. And on the other hand, like I don't have any hobbies that are not monetizable. Like I joke with my friends that my hobby is making money, and that's largely born out of this whatever it is, my drive to make everything work. And so I think that, my current situation where my to-do list is out of control, and I've got stuff kind of all over the place, it brings up this this tension that I've had where I want to be so busy that I can't do anything else, and I also don't want to do anything ever under any circumstances. And it's this sort of paradox of, I don't even know how to really describe it outside of just, I feel like I want all the things at the same time, because, I want to have a full social calendar, but I also want to have like no obligation so that I can just go full goblin mode and knock out my entire to-do list. I want to take vacations, but I also, don't want to fall a week and a half behind on anything. And, I want to be able to delegate, but I also want to be able to do everything. Like, I like doing stuff. And so I'm kind of in this interesting space where, I have a lot to do, and I have a lot of opportunities, and I don't want to say no to things. And so really good ideas are coming around, and I'm having to make a decision on, like, do I actually have bandwidth for this? And so far the answer has been yes, but I think I'm starting to approach the point where maybe the answer is no, and that's such a great problem. Also a really weird problem, because saying no to things you really want to do is super weird. It's a weird complication. But so what am I rambling about? What am I trying to talk about today? So I guess I'm seeing some folk like Nate saying this is resonating, Mike saying this is relatable. I've had this conversation offline, like, in bars and in different situations, and it feels like this is definitely something that is not unique to me, and I've met a lot of people who sort of approach things the same way. And I guess something that I'm trying to grapple with, for better or worse, and I bear with me here, because I think I'm circling around a point without knowing exactly what it is. But something that I'm grappling with right now is my own relationship with what is enough in terms of work, because I don't, when have you hit a point where you can say, yeah, that's good, I did enough? And I think having clear ideas of where the threshold is, where you can kind of take your foot off the gas, isn't something that I've ever done. And I don't think a lot of us do that. We look at it as if I'm good today, I can be better tomorrow. And I talk about this constantly, this like 1% better all the time. And I've been wondering if maybe there's a point where you don't want to be 1% better, where you want to sort of say, like, we've gone far enough with this, right? And I'm not sure I have an answer or even a fully formed thought on this. It's just sort of a, thinking about, like, what is there a point, not when, but like, is there a point that your skill, or your growth in a skill more specifically, starts to cross a threshold where you're getting diminishing returns? Is there a point where your income crosses the threshold where you're getting diminishing returns? And they've got research that shows that yes, there is. But that it changes for everybody, and like specifically why that threshold exists. Because like with income, the study was basically like, can money buy happiness? And the answer is unequivocally yes, to a point. And this is an old study now, so the numbers don't really add up the same anymore. But I think it was, with inflation, roughly like $120,000 a year or so. you absolutely are happier if you start making more money and you cross that threshold, because it starts to remove certain fears and anxieties and things that occupy your brain. Like, I can give you a very specific example that I remember. When I first moved to Portland, I was moving over from Montana, and I would estimate, because it was all through business, so like there were expenses and things that didn't all, I didn't keep all the money that I made because a lot of it went to expenses. I would guess that I was probably making around $35,000 a year, is my guess, when I moved to Portland. And I can specifically remember going to a grocery store with a calculator and having to keep a list and a running total, because I knew how many dollars I could spend on groceries, and if I went over that limit, I would miss a different bill. There was a point in my income where that stopped happening, and now, I'm very comfortable these days, and I have no complaints about money. So now when I go to the grocery store, I don't look at price tags. I know what I want to eat today, and so I get the things that I want to eat and I put them in my cart, and then I go and I swipe a credit card and I don't even know what it costs, because it doesn't matter. It's not like I'm not buying enough stuff that it's a problem. It's, if I go spend $50 or $100 on groceries, materially for me, and I'm acknowledging, like, I'm in a great place, and I'm very grateful for this. But like, the difference between a $50 grocery cart and a $100 grocery cart doesn't factor in to my reality, given my current spending habits, right? And so I don't have to look at those prices. And a category of stress just disappeared from my life when my day-to-day existence stopped being a math problem to see if I was going to overdraw my checking account. And so, absolutely, money buys happiness in those situations, because when I stopped having to worry about whether or not I was going to make rent, I could start applying that mental energy toward something else that was more meaningful, or that helped me grow more, or any of those things. It took away this constant fear and allowed me to replace that with energy spent on something else. And I think that's sort of the thing that I'm wondering about, is like, is there a point where, like, is that true for other things? Is that true for skill? Like, if I'm learning web dev, is there a point where I can say that I know, and like, where's the point of diminishing returns? At which point is it like I'm no longer feeling, fear that I can't get the job done, or I'm no longer hitting these long stretches of like, I have to go research this because I don't know how to get this job done. And instead it's crossing over into, trying to get the high score. Because that's sort of what happens with money, is you cross the threshold where it solves the problems that you had. It removes that fear, it removes that stress. And then it sort of just becomes like, well, can I make more? Like, how much more? How fast can I make the bank account grow? And that, I don't think that's the part they prove doesn't make us any happier. It just becomes sort of an obsession with more and more and more. So with skill, is it the same thing? Like, do we cross a threshold where now it's, I don't have imposter syndrome. I'm not worried about whether or not I can get a thing done. I'm just sort of like competing with other nerds in the space to see who's the bigger nerd. And like, is that fun? Like, are we enjoying that? Is it helpful or useful to have the most trivia? And I think, like, unless you want to go on, HTML Jeopardy, I don't know. And now I don't know where that threshold is. And I think it's probably different for every career, every person, every job. But it does feel like it exists in the same way that there's a limit to how much money will make you happier. I think there's a limit to how much skill will fulfill you. Unless, I guess, the source of fulfillment is the learning itself, right? And that, I think, that's a whole other complicated thing. But I see a couple questions coming in, so I'm gonna break off on this little rant, and let's take some questions. How do I manage expectations for upcoming deadlines? Okay, so my superpower in business, the one thing that I think has made the biggest difference in my ability to get and retain and keep clients happy, has been over communication. And whenever I get this wrong is when I start to feel bad. And it's also the only times that I've ever had client relationships go sour, is when communication goes quiet, right? So if I am working on something, I use my experience to take a guess at how long that thing is going to take me. And then I multiply it by 1.5 because I'm always wrong. And then using that guess, I communicate it to the client or the boss or the whoever. And I make it clear that that is an estimate and that we will confirm when we're closer in the project, right? And then it's on me at that point to start tracking dates. If I say this will take me 3 weeks, at 1.5 weeks, I should have a calendar reminder. I should have a something that tells me like, hey, you're halfway through the time that you said you were going to take to do this project. It's time to post a status update and it's time to reassess where you are in the project. And if I realize that I said it was going to take me 3 weeks and I'm only 15% of the way through the project, I need to hedge that bet. And I need to tell the client now, hey, we were working toward a goal of this date. We've hit some unexpected things. Here's where we are on progress. And can we move this back to this date? At which point, like a week and a half out, a week and a half can be kind of tight. It depends on what you're doing, right? Like if you've agreed to do something for a launch, a deadline's a deadline. If you've agreed to do something because it's a project that you're working on and they want to have expectations of when it's coming, but there's not really like a public launch, there's no commitment outside of internally, we said this is the date it would be done. Early communication is what changes it from like, well, you said this would be done to, yeah, it's okay. We can, you're communicating clearly. Another week is no problem. And that type of communication, that type of early understanding of where things are makes every single bit of difference in the process, because as an individual, as the one doing the work, when I am assessing my work at regular intervals throughout a project and checking in against where I thought I would be, I learn how to make better estimates first and foremost, because I'm not just saying like, oh, build a website. Yeah, that'll take a couple weeks. I'm saying like, okay, I need to build a website, and like, here are the chunks that are gonna go into that. I think it'll take this many weeks. And then I go back to the customer and I say, here's like my timeline. And then at whatever my intervals are, maybe every 2 weeks, I do an assessment of where I thought I would be versus where I am. And that helps me understand how long individual processes are taking. If I say, that the planning should be 25% of the project, and we're going back and forth in meetings, and we're like 3 weeks in, and that was supposed to be close to the deadline, but we're still in planning, I want to assess that not when we're 3 weeks into planning, but when we get past the 1 week that I thought we were going to spend in planning, and say, hey, just so everybody knows, we're crossing into pushing the deadline with the way this planning is going. We had planning scheduled to end on this date. We're a couple days past that. We can still get back on track, but we got to make a decision today. Or if you want, we can move back the deadline and we can continue on this track if you want to like really make sure we get this right. And then the client can make the decision. And like, here's one of the things that's really powerful about that is if I'm on top of the schedule, if I'm on top of the deadlines, and I'm the one letting them know when we're missing certain dates or when we're starting to get at risk of missing certain dates, the power shifts and the amount of trust that goes into me increases. And what I've noticed is also, like, one of the things that we all complain about is scope creep, right? And when a customer or a client or a boss or whoever is telling us about a thing they want to do, or they're kind of like hemming and hawing over making a final decision, when you say, hey, it's okay if we don't do this, but just so you're aware, we're crossing over the point where this is going to start extending timelines. And so I'm happy to keep going as long as you want, but we are going to have to reassess the deadline once we finish this planning phase. 90% of the time, it will cause a decision to get made because people don't want to be the reason that a deadline gets held up. And so it's not only about keeping yourself on track, but it's about keeping everybody else on track. And it gives you the ability to sort of control I would say the indecisiveness of a room. Because again, if a customer says, I want this by next week, and you say, great, if you want it by next week, we need to make a decision by tomorrow on XYZ so that I can work on it. And then tomorrow comes and goes and they don't give you that decision, you just email them and you say, hey, we're not going to hit next week because we missed the deadline of yesterday. And if you get it to me today, then I can maybe get it to you the Monday following. And then they don't do it, and you just continually let them know, right? Because then they're the ones driving the deadlines, and you're keeping track of like where timelines are and who's responsible for what. That sort of tracking is a huge pain in the ass. But whenever I don't do it, things get weird. And like I can actually think of a project right now that got off the rails because I was working with somebody and I just lost touch with them. Like I don't know what happened. I sent them a few emails, they didn't respond, and then I got kind of like off the project, and then I came back and they still didn't respond, and I ended up copying somebody else on their team who was like, yeah, go ahead. And now I'm so like out of sorts on it that now we're past reasonable deadline for me. I'm late on this project, right? And so I have to pull myself back together and get back on track. But it feels weird in a way that it wouldn't have had I been more proactive about communicating these deadlines, right? And so I'm actively feeling the absence of having managed a deadline properly. So okay, that's that that is, I would say that, like, if there's one major skill that I would encourage in any role, it doesn't matter if you're an individual contributor, if you are a freelancer, if you're a manager, a boss, whatever it is, figuring out how to break down projects into milestones and like really managing those deadlines, it's such a superpower. Like you will have an unbelievable amount of sense of control. And also, like, even if you're in an unhealthy organization, like if you're trying to do cover your ass office politics, that type of deadline management is that's your riot gear. You cannot be like, no one can touch you if you keep clear notes of what was said, when things were due, and if people don't do those things, you can just point to it and say, like, this is what the timeline was, and I'm only able to do what I'm able to do. Here's all the things we missed. This wasn't me, right? And that's the worst case scenario. But if you play it from that angle and then take it to a non-adversarial place where it's a collaboration tool to help people get things done together, and making sure that people understand who's up to make a decision and what happens next and how that affects timelines, it just makes projects work better. And it removes that feeling of like, where are we? Why isn't anything happening? You know, the check-in from the boss who's like, hey, how's it going? Who's saying, you know, they're clearly, they're like, they want an update, right? Don't make your boss ask for an update. Give them the update. Hit the client with a note that says, here's where things are. Here's the dates that we talked about. Here's where dates are aligning in reality. You know, if those aren't the same, here's what changed. That status update it'll change your whole career. Let's see. How to not feel overwhelmed when something you learn takes more time than usual and you don't understand things at the start. So I think the biggest thing about learning anything new is the sense of you almost have to be immersed in it without understanding it before you can gain understanding. And a lot of times as we gain skills, there's so much crossover between one skill and the next. Like if I've been writing JavaScript for a really long time. If I switch over to C#, it's not starting from scratch. I understand a lot of the things of how programming languages work from my experience with JavaScript. So I'm not just like dropping into C# with no frame of reference, right? However, if I were to suddenly drop into, I don't know, pharmacy, and I'm trying to learn about how people compound medicines and all the different things and the chemistry and the safety measures and the regulations, like I don't know any of that stuff, and none of my skills have any overlap with that stuff. So I would be completely at sea when I first started learning that. And so the best thing I could do then, and I did this with executive leadership. Like when I became a VP, I had never done any of this stuff before. I didn't know how to put together a good like executive proposal. I didn't understand how the company spreadsheets worked. I didn't really understand what the reports were, that like the financial reports or how you would even calculate things like there was a million acronyms I didn't even know. There's still acronyms I don't know. And I would sit in those meetings and I would listen to people talk and have no idea what was going on. And I'd just be quietly Googling jargon whenever they would say a word and I would Google it. And if I didn't know what that word meant, I would ask. And then I would get a little more context. And I still didn't feel like I could contribute. But what I noticed was that by being immersed in it, I was picking things up way faster than if I was trying to like read books on the side or something. And that immersion led to me feeling it. I didn't feel confident, but I also didn't feel overwhelmed because I knew I wasn't supposed to know this yet. I knew that I was learning. And so I think the biggest thing about feeling overwhelmed is letting go of the guilt for not knowing something, because if you haven't learned it, you can't know it. And you have to go through the phase of being bad at things so that you can get good at things. So embracing that feeling of, I'm going to get completely stuck into this. I know that I won't know how this works, and I know that I'm not going to know what's going on, but I also know that the longer I spend here, the more of this will start to make sense, and I can use what I'm seeing happen in reality as a list of things to look up so that I gain more context and more understanding. And the feeling of being lost quickly gets replaced with a feeling of knowing, like understanding what's going on, but not necessarily being able to contribute. I'd say it's sort of like learning a language. Like when I went to Spain, I didn't speak enough Spanish to really function, right? I'd taken like a year of Spanish in high school, and I don't know that I was paying a lot of attention. So I get there, I have no idea what's going on. It's just kind of washing over me. And eventually I start to pick out some patterns. Like when I go to a restaurant, there are certain things that happen every time. And I started to learn some of just through rote memorization, how people do standard greetings, how to ask for the check, how to, what coffee was, what ham and cheese was, what, like stuff that you do all the time. You start to like pick out these things that you can function on. And then with a little bit more, we were doing Duolingo and all the things to try to learn more. I got to the point where now I was picking up, maybe 30, 40% of spoken conversation, but I couldn't contribute. I couldn't say much back. I called it taxi cab Spanish. I could point at things that were nearby, anything that existed right now. I couldn't talk about the future. I couldn't talk about abstract concepts. I couldn't really form a full sentence, but I could say like, sandwich, please, for me, coffee, please, for her. Like, it's not like great grammar, not anything fully formed, but I could sort of play along. And then over time, we got better. And like, I'm still not fluent in Spanish because we left Spain and I stopped practicing. But we just noticed that like by being immersed, we learned infinitely more than we did by just trying to do Duolingo by ourselves or trying to learn from a book. The immersion was really what makes that stuff stick. And I think it's true with anything. If you can surround yourself with it constantly, just do it, right? Because the prolonged exposure just it lets your brain find patterns that and that's how your subconscious works. It's a pattern matching machine. So that's 100 million things to get at. What's up, Frackberg? How you doing? What's up, Matt? This is probably the most I've ever. Yeah. Okay. Great. I mean, but no, this is good because when I talk about this stuff, sometimes I worry that I'm just sort of like droning on about stuff people don't care about. But I really hope that this is helping folks. Got your first issue from Deadline Mismanagement. That's a whole thing. Like I've done it many times in my career, and it's still like I just said it, like it still happens. Trying to get better, and I think every time it gets a little bit easier. What's up, Sylvia? It's good to see you. I'm glad you're here. Procrastinating a lot, simple tasks taking too much time. This is a tough spot to be in because I know this feeling, and I don't think I've ever been clinically depressed, so I can't speak from that aspect if that's what's going on. But I can I can speak to the complete loss of motivation. And for me, that was coming from burnout. And I think that burnout is a form of it's like it's the collapse that comes from being out of alignment with stuff that doesn't hold a lot of value, you know? When I've found myself in these situations and I find myself procrastinating, I find myself kind of staring at a list that doesn't feel like it's getting any smaller. What I've attempted to do, and this is kind of counterintuitive, is to like get away from it for a couple of days. Like unplug, like lock your phone in a drawer and just like be in the woods if you can. Not because that's going to solve your problems, but because it hopefully gives you enough space from the problems to measure them as opposed to just responding to them. I found that when things get stressful, we tend to get very reactive, and reactivity is good in a crisis, but it doesn't get you out of crisis. It allows you to stop from drowning, but it doesn't get you out of the water, if that makes sense. And so when I find myself feeling like all I'm doing is reacting to incoming, I need that space so that I can kind of look and try to identify, is there like a thing that is making me feel this way? Like is my sadness about my to-do list? Is it about something completely unrelated to my to-do list? Like, maybe like I had, many years ago, I had a relationship end, and it was a multi-year relationship, and I just didn't have a lot in me for like a month after that. And it had nothing to do with my work, my interest in my work, my ability to do my work. It was just, it was just a shitty month. And I kind of just had to I did what I could to stay afloat during that month. And when I started to feel better, I was able to get back on top of things. But most of the time, it's not something like that. Most of the time, it's that there's something in the work itself that is at odds with me. And maybe it's like, I'll give you a good example. I took on a project years ago where I agreed to do work that I am good at, but I hate. And I've talked about this a little bit. There's a matrix that I draw, where on this axis you've got good at it, bad at it, and then on this axis you've got I love this, and good at it, bad at it, and I love this and I hate this, right? And you've got 4 quadrants, and if you start mapping out the things that you do in those quadrants on that matrix, and you kind of start to see like what falls in the like I'm good at this and I love doing this quadrant, how much of that is your day to day, right? Like if I spend 80% of my day in I'm good at this but I hate it, there's no way I'm feeling like, even if I'm good at it, I like the reward of a job well done exists. But like, so for example, I took on, it was a ton of administrative work, and I'm good at I've run a business for a long time. I'm good at the spreadsheet stuff. I can make projections. I can do capacity planning. I can make plans. I can manage deadlines. I can manage teams and projects and to-do lists. But oh boy, do I hate it. Like, being responsible for somebody else's productivity is not a thing that I want. It's not I don't want to do that specifically, like the what I would consider project management. That is a skill that I have and I abhor. I hate doing it. I will happily pay somebody else to do that job, but I signed up to do it anyways because I needed the money. And I found myself just every single day staring down a to-do list, and it was the last thing I wanted to do. And I was dreading going to work. I was dreading every time that anything came up. I was like, oh my God, there's going to be more stuff. And I just found I had no interest at all in doing any of the things that were on my plate because I had signed up for a bunch of stuff I hated, right? And and this was the hard part, I needed to get it done so that I could get paid and so that I could get it off my plate so I didn't have to do it anymore. But I had negative motivation. Like I was actively trying to find ways to distract myself from doing this work because I hated it so much. And that was a really important lesson to me that I kind of had to accept that it doesn't matter how broke I am, taking that job was a mistake. Like it would have been better for me to go apply at go back to, I worked at FedEx Kinko's before I got into web. It would have been better to go back to FedEx Kinko's and take that job for a few months while I figured out what was going on than to take that job that was a skill that I hated, right? Because it sapped all of my mental energy and it left me in a spot where I had nothing left. There was no energy left for anything else because I was spending all of it hating this job. So I do think that I said this earlier, but sometimes the only way out is through, and you just got to, I don't know, do whatever you got to do to fight through that to-do list and get to the end of it. But also be aware of like, is it because it was a to-do list that you didn't want, or is it something else, right? And if it's a to-do list that you didn't want, what agency do you have? What choices can you make to try to minimize the amount of things that end up on your to-do list again that fall into that camp? And this, I make the joke all the time that a career is a pie eating contest where the prize for winning is more pie. So if your to-do list is full of stuff that you hate, that's also you sending the signal to everyone around you that the work that you do is that work, right? Like you take on these projects that you don't like, but everybody sees you taking on these projects, so they just give you more of those projects. You're broadcasting what you do, and the career is what you do, so you're building yourself a career of that, right? And if that's not what you want, finding ways to maneuver out from under those projects and maybe volunteering for other projects that are closer to your wheelhouse. And sometimes it takes a few tries. Sometimes you gotta maneuver, from, if you're doing admin work, maybe you maneuver from admin work and you take like one step closer to, if you want to end up over here, maybe you can't jump directly. Maybe you got to do like a couple hops to end up in the job that you actually want. But that's what career building is. It's like a recent example of this is the stuff that I've been doing. Like right now, my job it's so off the wall that it sounds, it is made up. I created this job, but like I get to make reality TV for developers, more or less. And that job did not exist. I wanted it though. And so I kind of had to take a few sideways hops from, developer experience to being a VP, to being a consultant where I made tutorials, to getting, a couple early prototypes of this thing, to getting a little closer to actually getting the budgets, to being able to make what I'm making now. And I'm still taking small hops toward where I really want to end up. And it's going to take time. But I think that's like, because I'm not taking work that absolutely saps me of energy, I have energy left over to sort of maneuver toward that next step that gets me closer to the thing that I ultimately want to do. I don't know if that was helpful. I'm sorry that you find yourself in that situation, but I do think there's a way out. But it's going to take that. You got to create some space so that you can reflect on it and figure out why. Like why is it making you feel that way? And if it's just a bad time, this too shall pass. Give it some time. You'll come through. If it's work that's out of alignment with who you want to be, then start strategizing on how you can maneuver out and get to the work you want. You don't got to call me out like that, Vinny. Wait, no. See, this is where, I don't, no necesitas, whatever, shush. Um, let's see. Struggling with burnout, self-taught, 4 kids, full-time non-coding job, part-time 40-hour-a-month coding job. Holy shit. I mean, that's rough. That's a lot. Here, look. I don't have kids, so I can only speak to the work part of this, and I found, so I had I learned to code part time while I was in a band, and while I was in that band, I also had to take like whatever work I could find. So I worked in, Wendy's. I worked in like a printing press as the pre-press department. Worked in, every single pizza place in my hometown. And so I had to do those jobs, and then I was, booking tours and practicing with my band, and we were out playing shows. And then I was trying to learn to code at the same time. And then when the band broke up, I ended up taking a night audit job at a hotel because I found out that a night audit job was like 45 minutes a night of work and 7 hours of being there just in case somebody needed you. And I was like, wait, and I asked him in the application process, I was like, is this the sort of thing where like I can study while I'm at the desk as long as I'm not ignoring a customer? And they were like, yeah. I was like, cool. So I figured out that if I was like doing my code stuff while on the clock at my night audit job, and I don't know how I would have gotten through it if I hadn't had that, honestly, because it was like the only way that I've ever found, for me at least, to like get an almost full-time education in. Because I tried school. I'm really bad at like college wasn't for me. I struggle with structured learning like that because I feel like too much of it is on like memorization and stuff that wasn't like I care about application, and so I needed to like build stuff, right? I needed to have my hands in it, and that's just the way that I learn is I build stuff and I kind of internalize it that way. And so being in trying to find a job where I was able to sort of double dip on my time was huge. But I obviously acknowledging that that's probably not feasible for just about anybody. I honestly don't know. Like I don't know how people do it, and I admire people who are able to so much because like kids are a lot, and like being a parent is a lot. Having a full-time job is a lot. Being able to squeeze in a part-time job at the same time is, that's really tough. And then the networking and all the things that you've got to do to try to get out beyond just doing the coding work is also really it's tough. I do think I do think that what you're doing, like the fact that you're here, the fact that you're talking to folks is probably a great step in the right direction, because I think ultimately the network is what helps tip over from like a part-time coding job to a full-time coding job. So happy to see you here. But yeah, I don't know. Stay strong. You've got a lot going on, and that is very challenging. You shushed. Good, you shushed. Yeah, I worked in pre-press. I did so much. Like I've had so many weird jobs. I was in pre-press. I worked in a graphic design shop. I wrote this article forever ago called "Wizards and Assholes," because it was my first exposure to a actually coder type. And in retrospect, it was like the funniest conversation I've ever had. But I was working as a graphic designer for this tiny little printing press. It was like an old house that they'd converted into an office. And so you'd like walk in through the front door, and then I think where the kitchen used to be, they'd like cleared it out and they turned it into desks. There were like 4 or 6 computers, something like that. And it was me and 2 other guys that worked back there. And then the owner of the press was, he was kind of in and out whenever. But I was learning to code. Like I think at this point I was customizing some MySpace pages, and I'd like started dabbling in learning like how to build a standalone page. If I remember correctly, it was table-based in iframes. It was incredible. And I remember having a conversation with the web guy, right? And I told him that I was trying to learn web, and if he could recommend, I don't remember what it was. I wanted him to teach me something, right? And he looks at me and he says, can you tell me the difference between cell padding and cell spacing? And I knew the answer, but I thought he was tricking me. So I didn't want to answer right away. And I apparently hesitated too long because he just looks at me and goes, "You're not ready yet." And in retrospect, that's the funniest fucking conversation I've ever had in my life professionally, because gatekeeping on cell padding versus cell spacing is hilarious. Anyways, so this guy he was a gatekeeping jerk. And I remember feeling very self-conscious about that. It was kind of, that was my introduction to imposter syndrome, was sort of retroactively feeling it, because I was like, "Oh, I'm learning web dev. Web dev. Let's be web dev buddies." And then he called me an idiot. And I suddenly was like, "Whoa, do I have to know stuff before I'm allowed to talk?" Right? That whole thing. But anyways, that was a job. Yeah, I delivered pizzas. I made pizzas. I sold pizzas. I sold vacuums door to door for a while. That was fun. I worked at Kirby as well. I probably didn't work at Kirby. I bet I worked at some little shady subcontractor licensor thing. But I would go to this tiny weird room to get training on whatever the latest sales pitches were, and then they'd have us practice our sales pitches on each other. Then they would load us up into a minivan and drive us into neighborhoods and drop us off to go knock a block. And let's see, how long did I last in that job? 2 weeks, maybe 3. It was weird. That's not a job I would wish on anybody. I'll tell you what, though, it is good at building your resilience, because people get real creative with how they tell you to leave when you knock on their door and try to get them to buy a $1,600 vacuum. It was indeed Kirby. Yes, it was awful. What's up, Christian? How you doing? It's good to see you. Too much of school is about paying attention, and how dare you get out of my chat? No, here's the thing. I had a problem in school because if all we're doing is rote memorization, if I need to memorize something long enough to take a test, I don't need very long. And so this used to drive my teachers up a wall, because I wouldn't pay attention in class at all, and then I would read the chapter the night before the test, and then I would ace the test, because my short-term recall is killer. If I need to memorize something long enough to take a test on it, I got it. I'm fine. I don't remember any of it a week later. I just store it into short-term memory long enough to answer the questions, and then I just purge it, because I'm when am I ever going to need 25 lines of a Marcus Aurelius speech again? I'm not. But I can do that. I can cram and pass a test. So I had great grades despite being an absolutely terrible student. I think I graduated with a 3.6, and I think I read a novel through most of my senior year. But that was I'm not engaged by that, right? It didn't, none of it made me feel like I was learning. It just made me feel okay, so I read this book, and then I take the words from this book and I put them on this page, and then they let me leave. Cool, I can do that. It never felt like I was getting a skill, and then I went to college, and it was kind of the same. I went to, and this could be the college I went to a technical school, because I wanted a fast track to I was trying to go into graphic design, and I tried to pivot to web, and then the whole thing was a mess. But anyways, my first class, it was Adobe Illustrator, and I remember the teacher didn't know how to use Adobe Illustrator, and so I was showing the teacher how to do the thing the teacher was supposed to be teaching us, and I was like, I got to get out of here. Anyways, structured school was not for me. It's always been an issue. how to land a job in front-end web development, what to learn, any advice I give. Okay, so this is, I apologize in advance because this is going to be really frustrating advice, but there's not a right answer here. Just keep learning, keep building, keep sharing stuff, and that is how it works. It's, I have a whole, actually, you know what? I am going to give you, somewhere in here, I have a video that I can share. This one. So I'm going to drop this video in the chat. This is a video that I just recorded, including Christian Nwamba, who's in the chat here. But this video is about how to create luck. And I talked to people who have made huge careers for themselves. And I also talked to folks who are still in the process of finding their first job. And we got into a lot of the specifics of like what you can do, what you control, how you create your lucky break so that when somebody needs someone, you're on their mind, right? So I would highly recommend like just go watch that video because it's going to make a much better answer than I can give because it's from lots and lots of people. Let's see here. Where are we right now? Ooh, this is a good one. All right, Deborah. Any tips for falling back in love with tech after a near miss with burnout? A new excellent job, owe them a more inspired version of me than they're currently getting. So I think the hard part about burnout is that it doesn't heal, it evolves, right? Like it changes who you are. And I think about it in the sense of it doesn't ruin you by any stretch, but it changes your relationship with work because burning out is a process of realizing that like, I guess for a lot of us, like burnout comes because we feel like we can work our way out of a problem. And so we talk about how good our work ethic is. We talk about, how productive we are, how much we can get done. Like we can handle anything. Yeah, give me that to do. I can handle that. And then we're smashed into the reality of that's not how it works. Like the work has to be like there's more to it than just ticking boxes off of a list. And so I think that when we go through burnout, it changes a core belief of what working is and what working does for us. And then we have to rebuild our philosophy after burnout kind of tears it down. And so the hard part is that takes work, and that work is not necessarily fast. In my case, when I burned out, I spent like a year doing a really simple contract and living in I did geo arbitrage. I like lived in different countries where I didn't need to make a lot of money so that I could like just do this one contract and not have a lot to do. And in that year, I went through several existential crises and did a lot of work on myself and a lot of trying to figure out who I wanted to be and what was meaningful to me and all those things. And ultimately, I don't think a lot of us have that privilege of being able to take like a full year off. But in like from the ashes of burnout, I think what we get to decide then is what is the work that is worth our effort and what is the work that makes us feel like what we're doing is worth doing. And in that process of thinking through that, we also get to think about what is meaningful to us. And is that, helping the people around us? Is that is that building a great team? Is that, I don't know what, like, is it being the high, is it being the CEO? Is Is it getting a job as a principal engineer? Whatever that is, right? Like you can decide what your meaning is. Um, I'm as a tangential thing. I don't think there's anything as any such thing as a finish line. So I don't typically, like for me at least, I don't set goals that are like points in time. Like getting a certain amount of money or getting a certain title has never really been rewarding to me, because once you get it, you still have to be alive, right? Like life continues, and now you've hit the goal and nothing materially changed. You just got the raise or you got the title. And so instead I try to think of like states of being. So for me, what made life meaningful for me, what made work meaningful for me, was my ability to impact someone outside of myself. And that manifested in a lot of ways. I basically, what I realized is the work that makes me happy is the work where I can see a measurable improvement in somebody else's life as a result. And the way that manifested at first was I took a job at IBM. That was my first job back from my big burnout. And I was able to work on internal tooling that removed a huge amount of like internal pointless toil that they had on the IBM cloud team around setting up front end environments. They were doing things like forcing every dev to install and configure Nginx. And like if you're a front end dev and you're opening Nginx, that is horrifying. It's not what you want to do. And they were, you had to set up a reverse proxy and you had to do all this firewall stuff, and it was very command line heavy, and it was too much, right? And like as a dev, as a front end dev, that's like the opposite of rewarding. That's what actively burns people out. So my goal was to make something that removed some of that struggle. And so I built some internal tools, some like NPM packages and stuff that would like auto configure front end environments so that people didn't have to do that on their own. And when I did that, I got to see measurable improvement in people's day to day. I worked on a data layer for IBM Cloud that the same thing. I got to see a measurable improvement in people's day to day. And that got me into this internal education tour of like trying to teach people what it was and how it worked and why it was beneficial. And I got to see that improve people. I got to see the educational stuff I was doing. I watched people's careers kind of take off in different directions because they were learning new things. I got to work with folks on my team and train them up, and they went from being fresh interns to now some of them are tech leads, and it's been like 8 years, right? And some of these folks are like just killing it, And I guess 8 years is a long time, but it feels like for me, it took me 10 years to go from like first ever website project to having a job that wasn't like agency freelance work. So the rapid rise of folks that I've worked with, maybe it's normal in tech, but it feels fast to me. But then, I was able to turn that into when I went to Gatsby and later to Netlify, and now most of what I'm doing is I'm trying to get other people to feel a little bit better about this industry, and like a huge goal for me and a huge source of my meaning is being able to have conversations with people that leave them feeling a little more energized for tech, instead of feeling like things are more hopeless or more complicated, or I got to learn more stuff or else I'm not relevant. Like I don't want that to be the way that people feel. I want people to feel like, we can do this. Like it's okay. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to, there's no right answer. There's just progress. And if you're learning and you're growing and you're having a good time, that's a great career. You're doing a good job. So for me, I externalized what value was. Like I create value for me by creating value for others. And that was what gave me the meaning to come back from the burnout and kind of make this fun again. Is now the way I measure success is if I do something and I can see the light bulb come on for somebody. Or earlier today when somebody said they learned something meaningful from this stream, that kind of exchange is the reason that I'm here. That's why I'm on today, is to have conversations like these and hopefully some of the silly stuff that I've done in the 20 plus years that I've been in this industry is going to help somebody avoid a stumbling block that I hit, or help somebody, make an advancement faster than I did, or even just like find a little bit of excitement to do this work again. Now, I don't think that my motivation should be everybody's motivation, but I think that the important thing is that I was able to identify sort of like the thing under the thing that made me like this job. And when I did that, it made it easier for me to filter work for what I would actually find rewarding versus what would drive me more toward burnout. And so that's maybe like the underlying challenge of recovering from burnout, is that it's, the work itself is a means, but we have to identify the end. Like, to what end are we doing this work? And if we can identify that, and it makes some assumptions, but it sounds like you're at an excellent company, so you should have some agency over, doing tasks that drive you toward the end that you want. I don't know if that was helpful, but maybe it's something to chew on. I don't know. You tell me. What's up, Michael? How you doing? Automating AppleScript to proof pages in Quark. Ooh! Oh, Quark Express. Oh my goodness. Yes, I remember that. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Doing too much planning, doing nothing, also putting me in a spot of stress. There are many things I can relate to. Too much planning and not enough doing is like a core sense of my stress. Like, I love a plan. I love to get ready for things. I love to think about all the contingencies and all of the ins and outs and the ways that it could expand and expand and expand. But then doing, like there's this sense. So there's like two parts of the creative process, right? There's the expansion, where you're starting from nothing and you just have ideas and you plan and you plan and you plan and you plan. And then when you get to execution, you have to start contracting, and you remove and you remove and you remove until there's what you do, right? And this is so much fun, like creating and expanding and coming up with all the ideas, what could be. Nothing better. I love that. Sitting in a room, having a brainstorming session, just filling board after board with great ideas. Cannot imagine something that I enjoy more, right? But then, you've got a one-day session, noon rolls around, it's time to start limiting the options, and you have to start contracting. And now instead of like adding possibilities, you're removing possibilities, and I hate it. It's like, oh, but that's a good idea. No, I can't do it. Oh, but that's a good idea. No, I can't afford it. Oh my God. And then you get down to this like contracted list of, this is what we can do. This is what's actually aligned with our goals. It's what's practical given the timeline. It's what we can afford, et cetera. Like, all the constraints come into play, and you end up with your actual finished thing. This is what you're going to do. It's never as good as what you imagined during this phase, when you were at the everything is possible phase. And so you're mad at it. You don't like it as much as your original idea, which was completely impractical. You can see all the flaws with it, all the things that are missing. You can see what's not there. That part of the process is never fun, right? And I think that's why, writers, I forget who said this originally, but there's a writing quote that's, in order to be a good writer, you have to kill your darlings. And that means you're going to do stuff that you love that is not in service of what you're actually trying to get done, and you have to let it go. And for like, planning is one of those things that also I call, like, planning is also something that I call productive procrastination for me, because I will plan to avoid doing every single chance I get. Like, if I could write another document about what I want to happen instead of just doing the thing that I'm ostensibly wanting to do, I'll do it 100%. I'll like write another justification doc or another little think piece for myself why, X, Y, or Z is the best idea. Because once you do it, it's real, and somebody can see it, and they can judge it, and they can tell you whether or not you did a good job. And it's scary to get judged. I don't want to be judged. I want to be right. And I feel like if I plan enough, then I can be right. And the thing that I make can't be judged because it'll be so incontrovertibly correct that everybody will see it and go, well, obviously that was the only solution that could have possibly existed. I mean, I know that's not possible, but it's what my heart wants. So I have to fight against that instinct and remember that, like, when I've hit critical mass on planning, and I feel like there are already 5 times more ideas than I could realistically do, then I have to switch into that pruning mode and just start cutting things off, because if I don't, then I'll literally just plan until the end of time. Let's see. Michelangelo Calori says, I'm at a dead end. The only thing I can think to escape the rat race is to learn programming. Here's the thing. Programming is a good way to make a bigger paycheck. It is currently a role that pays better than most. However, it is still a job, and it will be challenging to learn. It will be challenging to get into. And if you don't want to do it, if you're just doing it because you think you can get a bigger paycheck, it may be difficult to progress. So I don't, this is hard because I think it's okay to do something just for the money. I think that is a perfectly reasonable response to a world that is completely defined by whether or not you have enough money. I think the challenge becomes if it's something that doesn't bring you any satisfaction, that can be it is tough to be a successful programmer if you hate it. I think you can take pride in a job well done and not make programming your entire identity. I know a lot of folks who do not code outside of work. They clock in, they code, they clock out, and they go do literally anything else. And that's a perfect, I really admire that, because I think it's cool to treat it as a trade, right? Like, there aren't a lot of doctors who, when they get out of the office, are going home and like performing open heart surgery on their pets. That's a silly thing to even imagine. But it's, we've sort of adopted it as the norm in programming, where like, if you code, like, obviously you're going to code all the time no matter what. That's not true. I don't think that needs to be the case. But I do think if you start learning to code and you get zero satisfaction from it, there are other, like, you can also make good money as an accountant. You can also make good money as a, like, manager or regional manager for I mean, honestly, like, if all you're doing is just trying to get a good paycheck, like, management roles at Walmart pay well. Like, you can, I don't think it's going to pay software salaries, but like, you can go drive a bus in Portland for, I think it was like 80 grand a year, right? And so if it's just about the money and you actively dislike the thing, look for other ways where maybe it's money and you kind of enjoy it, or like it's kind of satisfying. Because I think it's a bummer to get stuck in a role that has no reward other than the paycheck. Because I've been in that role, right? Like, I've done jobs where I got zero satisfaction out of doing the job and I just collected a paycheck. And those weren't happy times in my life. That was getting by, and it didn't matter. I was making more money in some of those roles, but it felt worse, right? So I don't know. this is such a nuanced topic, and it's so individual, and there's so many things that I'm not talking about that are important to keep in mind. But I do think that's the one thing that I worry about when people say, like, well, I guess I need to learn programming because it's the only way to make money, is like, I don't want a bunch of miserable people who like hate this stuff doing it because they believe it's the only way to make money. That's not a hopeful thing. I'm not being hopeful. Yeah, I don't know. How do you communicate potential negative outcomes to clients with approaching deadlines? Can you say more about what you mean by that? Because I think that like a potential negative outcome in the sense of like, because I think there's a big spectrum of what that could potentially mean. Like, client, you have a bad idea is different from, we underestimated the complexity of what we originally designed and we should rethink the architecture, is different from, I don't know, we discovered in the copy that you're being super ableist and may want to revisit that. Like, negative outcomes are such a broad thing that it's kind of hard to like, I communicate different things differently. Like, if the client is wrong, that's a different conversation than if I am wrong, right? If the client made a naive mistake, like they didn't understand something and made an assumption, and that assumption needs to be corrected, that's different than if they knowingly cut a corner because they wanted to save money, even at the expense of quality, right? Like, the complexity there is really, really challenging. Like, when something's not going to get done, or the functionality isn't the same as what they expect by that time, when being designed by someone else. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this kind of goes back to earlier in the show when I was talking about setting expectations and being really proactive about communicating dates and timelines and planning. As soon as something like that comes up, having a clear discussion about, like, okay, we've got a potential disconnection between the expectation and reality. And I want to flag this now because I don't want to go too far down this path if we need to revisit the plan. And then saying, here's what was designed, here's what I believe is possible given the time and the technology that we're using. Here's what's different, and here's, ideally, here's how we can approximate what you were going for. And then if you want to solve it exactly the way that was planned, then we probably need to go revisit whatever part of the decision is that caused it to diverge, right? The catch with any conversation like this is that it needs to be done in a way that doesn't throw somebody under the bus, because as soon as somebody gets accused, they shut down and you will not have a productive conversation. And so it's got to be approached ideally with curiosity. Like, if you can have that conversation in a way that leads other people to reaching the conclusion you have, as opposed to you kind of waving the solution at them and hoping that they understand it, that can be far more effective. And so I think the trick, the challenge, the whatever of communicating something that is potentially a negative is recognizing that, one, you have to make the assumption that everybody wants a good outcome, and that nobody's like intentionally being incompetent or intentionally derailing the project. And then from there, trying to understand if the plan was this and we aren't on track for that plan, like, why? And not why like somebody didn't do their job, but why, like, what constraint led to making the decision that changed the outcome. And sometimes that conversation will lead to a discussion about the constraints that can, fix a lot of things in planning. Sometimes it's recognition that like we made some assumptions that were bad. And in order for us to fix that, we're going to have to scale up or down, something that we were not planning on doing, like, scale up the number of devs we have, scale down the V1 scope, whatever. But ultimately, like the thing that I've noticed is that every conversation gets easier if it happens closer to the time that the issue occurred. So here's a very simplified example, but like if you're walking with a person and that person's child, and you stumble and bump the kid, and the kid drops their ice cream on the ground, and you say immediately, "Oh my God, I just knocked your ice cream out of your kid's hand. Let me go buy him a new ice cream. I'm so sorry." And they might say, "You know what? Don't worry about it. It's fine. This is their second ice cream today. They're okay. They don't need it." Or they might say, "Yeah, let's go back and get another one." And then you just, walk back to the ice cream shop and you solve the problem. If instead you knock the ice cream out of the kid's hand and then you stay quiet, and the parent looks down at the kid and goes, "What's going on? Did you throw your ice cream on the ground, buddy?" And the kid starts crying, and you stay quiet. And then like 3 days later, you're like, "Okay, I got to confess something to you." That is going to be such a worse conversation, right? Like there's no way that conversation goes better. And I think that a lot of times when we have issues at work, we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to draw attention to something that's not going well. But if you see that something's not going to work and you don't bring it up until weeks later, it's very difficult for the person who now has to deal with the fallout of that to not say, "Why didn't you bring this up when we were planning it 3 weeks ago?" Because it is really difficult to undo 3 weeks worth of work. It's usually pretty easy to undo 5 minutes worth of decisions. And so catching things as early as you can. And I know that we are not always in the room where these decisions are made. And sometimes we receive the finalized decision that was made by some executive somewhere. But again, as soon as you become aware of it, try to have that conversation so that, the quicker you can get that out into the open, the quicker you might just hear that, like, "Yeah, we know. We've talked about that, and there's nothing we can do about it. We're going to do the best we can and deal with it when the time comes." Which isn't a great answer to get, but it is an answer that I've heard. And sometimes you hear, "Oh, yeah, I guess we probably should have brought you in earlier in that conversation. Let's go back and talk to design." Easy peasy, right? But if you start building it, you spend 2 weeks on it, and you go, "You know what? I was right. This isn't going to work." And then your boss is like, dude, we're 2 weeks in now. Like now we're going to look like assholes, right? So that's the whole thing that I think is really, really challenging. I mean, if you love it and the money is great, but not the main motivation, I actually think that's wonderful. Don't know how to even evaluate if I'm good enough to get hired. That is okay. So that, I would say, is a great reason to share your work. Like if you're learning, share your work, because one, just in the act of sharing your work forces you to articulate your thoughts in a way that's going to help you with interviews. It's going to help you with explaining your code. It's going to help you in infinite ways, right? It helps you, collaborate with your teammates. But then externally, it also helps people understand where your skill level is at. It helps people see that you're capable of explaining yourself when you have to talk about a technical concept. It helps people see your growth and progress. If you post something today and something 6 months from now, I can see how much you've learned, right? That is a huge signal to me as a hiring manager that I don't get from a different person who's been working 6 months and hasn't posted anything. The other thing is, when you share your work, when you find a community that you can share work with, you get feedback, and that feedback will help you grow so much faster. When I was younger, I did so much of my work in a vacuum, and that's why it took me 10 years to get from like freelancer to the point where I was actually like employable by a company like IBM. If I had had a regular feedback cycle, if I'd had people that I was talking to about my code because I wasn't. I hired contractors, and I didn't like. I would review the contractor's code, but they wouldn't review mine, right? I was, I was like doing, I was running the business. I wasn't interested in collaboration. I was interested in deadlines. And when I started to actually share the work that I was doing, I would get feedback, and I just saw my progress rapidly ascend. So yeah, if you're trying to figure out like how to evaluate where you're at, share. And the short answer is, if you can make a program work, you're probably good enough to get hired somewhere, because entry level roles, there aren't a lot of entry level roles, but they do exist, and you can get them. And really, once you get the first role, it gets so much easier after that. So yeah, share everything as much as you can. Twitch mods, you on this spammer? Okay, so what time is it? I said I was going to do a short one today, and I think I should do a short one today because, like I said, my to-do list is out of hand, and I got to get some stuff done. So I've got like, let's say 10 more minutes. Thanks, Vinny. If anybody does anybody have like a last minute question? We'll do one more for the road here. I know. I'm sorry. I have a lot that I gotta get done. I'm working. Okay. I cannot wait to show you some of the stuff that I'm working on right now, because it's going to be so dope, but it's a lot. And I just have a ton of things that I have to get planned and prepared and all of that good stuff. But yeah, I can't, Vinny. I'm sorry. These ones are actually for, like, they're not my projects. They're other people's projects that I'm doing. Like, they hired me to produce them. But they're going to be dope. I'm really excited about it. So when the time comes, it will be great. Tomorrow morning, a new episode of Web Dev Challenge drops. We've got Shonday Person, Sydney Buckner, Alex Trost, and then Nick Vilku from Algolia. It's the topic is build an e-commerce site with a twist. So that is coming up. So, if you're not on the newsletter, do I have a newsletter banner? Let's see. I have that one. That's not really the one. If you go to, go to lwj.dev, and there's a newsletter box there. And if you sign up for that, I'll be sending out details tomorrow morning with a link to it, all that good stuff. You can also subscribe wherever you want to subscribe, on Twitch, on YouTube, you can do it on GitHub sponsors if you want. I wouldn't do GitHub sponsors because nothing's happening over there. You can subscribe in the Discord if you want, and soon, I hope soon, I'm going to be launching the new Learn with Jason site, which will have the ability to subscribe directly through the site. That's going to be really exciting because it means that more of the money that you spend on your subscription will actually go toward the production of content, which is huge. That'll be I cannot wait to get that done. Let's see. Seeing any final questions here. Let's see. Yeah, new Web Dev Challenge. Cannot wait for that. Very, very excited. And then we are going to be back on Thursday. We've got a new episode of Learn with Jason coming. This Thursday is going to be Matt Pocock talking about TypeScript generics, which I made the joke earlier. We're going to see who cries first on this episode. Is it going to be me because I get my brain melted by advanced TypeScript stuff? Or is it going to be Matt because I'm going to refuse to stop making generic puns the whole time that he's on the show? Tune in to find out. So with that, I think I'm gonna call this one done. I'm gonna try to knock out a few things on my to-do list. Thank you all very much for hanging out today, and please go go be nice to somebody today. Just go out of your way and say something nice to somebody just because you can, because it would please me. And I think it'll please you. And hopefully it pleases the person that you're nice to. That's just great. Everybody's day gets a little bit better. All right, y'all. See ya.